I'm 34 years old, a man, and my 62-year-old father, who has always been a stingy, selfish bastard and barely present in my life, recently found out how much I make. To my surprise, he suddenly decided to kick me out of my own house, using family values as an excuse. Then there's my stepsister, Emma, 29 years old and my dad's precious little princess who, of course, can do no wrong. Somehow, despite her lifestyle, working as an escort and running a failing OnlyFans account, she miraculously ended up pregnant. And now, my father wants to help her. And by help, he means throwing me out and making sure I hand over my house and my hard-earned money to this woman because of her poor life choices. For years, my father has barely acknowledged me as his son. But ever since he discovered my new house, my job, and, most shockingly, my income, he's suddenly much more eager to remind me that we're family. Not only that, but he's been trying to push me into bonding with his wife and her daughter. Technically, yes, Emma is his daughter too. But we were separated so early in life that I never even had the chance to build any kind of relationship with her. And honestly, thank God for that. I would have only ended up disappointed. Let me be clear. I'm not writing this for advice. I'm just venting. I have my own thoughts, opinions, and emotions, and you might not like them. You might disagree, but it doesn't change the fact that these are my feelings, and I have no one else to share them with. So, meet Emma, short for Emily, my half-sister. She's 5 years younger than me, and my father couldn't be prouder of her, which is insane, considering this woman does absolutely nothing with her life except jump from one meaningless fling to another, work as an escort, and run a failing OnlyFans account. And yet, my father calls her his pride and joy. Yeah, you heard that right. I'm guessing he just doesn't know the truth. And who's going to tell him? Look, I'm not the most conservative guy, but I have moral standards. I actually take the time to get to know women before sleeping with them. Sometimes there's a spark, but things like distance or scheduling conflicts get in the way. Other times, we just don't fully click. That's life. I don't do casual hookups. I think it's better to wait for the right person. And honestly, a high body count in a woman is a huge turnoff for me. I don't understand why some men treat it like a badge of honor. It's disgusting. Emma, on the other hand, she's the exact opposite of me. I doubt she even remembers how many men she's been with. And it's not just her personal choices that bother me. It's the fact that her job is straight up dangerous. Some men out there are not safe, and the thought of her getting hurt is unsettling. I don't get how anyone considers this a normal profession. And then there's the OnlyFans thing. She posts explicit videos and photos, hoping to make money, but she's failing miserably. Maybe she just doesn't know how to attract an audience, but for whatever reason, she's not making it work. How do I know all this? Well, funny story, one of my buddies actually told me. One night, after a few drinks, Emma texted him, offering to have some fun. The second I heard that, I was furious, because this guy had dated my sister. He swore up and down that he had no idea we were related at the time, and to prove it, he showed me the link she had sent him. Emma is always broke, constantly begging my father for money. So I guess business isn't exactly booming. I never had the guts to ask her about it directly, and I never told my father. But I did notice some things. Once, I saw her talking on the phone before getting into a car with an older man. He gave her flowers, and they drove off together. She would also sneak back into the house through the window at weird hours. I noticed all of this when I came home from college on breaks. I don't know if she's still doing it, but I don't want anything to do with it. I have a respectable job. I finally have my life together. I didn't live with my father's new family for long, mostly because he sent me away every chance he got. But I know Emma well enough to say that she takes after her mother, Lisa, who's now 58. Back in the day, Lisa thought she was every man's dream. She worked as a flight attendant and was attractive enough to catch my dad's attention. Now, she's your typical Botoxed-up, overbearing Karen. You know the type. Long claw-like nails, plastic smile, constantly bossing people around. She runs some local daycare, which honestly baffles me. How do parents trust their kids with a woman who looks like Edward Scissorhands? One wrong move, and she might accidentally poke someone's eye out. Anyway, she's just as insufferable as her daughter. Lisa has an opinion on everything and loves stirring up drama in other people's lives. Her voice is unbearable, and there's probably more plastic in her body than in the ocean. She's been a terrible influence on my father. I'm pretty sure she's the reason he had no problem dumping me in a boarding school when I was just 8 years old. She never wanted to raise a child that wasn't hers. Now, let's talk about my father, the real problem in this whole mess. He believes every single thing he does is justified, no matter how wrong it is, simply because he's lived a long life and knows best. The man actually told me once that he regrets having me because I'm nothing like him. And you know what? Thank God for that. My mom, on the other hand, was a strong woman. She knew exactly where her priorities were and took good care of my father. But they were just too different, and eventually, they split up. She always told me, "Your father isn't a bad person, just different. No matter what, he'll always be your dad, and you should never forget that." She never tried to turn me against him, even though I'm sure he was just as unbearable for her as he is for me now. They divorced when I was 4. 2 months later, my father married Lisa. A year after that, Emma was born. And then, when I was 5, my mother died in a car accident. I remember it so clearly because she was coming to pick me up from school. She was never late. But that day, she was 10 minutes behind. As a kid, it felt like an hour. She never made it. Some drunk driver hit her at an intersection. He survived. She didn't. Later, he got off with just a fine for driving under the influence. And me? I was left completely alone. I sat at school waiting. It took my father and Lisa 2 hours to come get me. No one told me what had happened. I was just confused, especially when I saw him instead of my mom. And I will never forget the look on his face when he turned to Lisa, exasperated, and asked, "So what the hell do we do with him now?" Her response? "Your kid, your problem." Well, guess what, Dad? Now you don't get to come to me demanding that I take care of your spoiled daughter. I finally have a stable job, I run a few small businesses on the side, and I've been working non-stop since I was 15. I've been financially independent ever since I aged out of the system, only coming home during holidays while I was in college. I've been on my own since I was 8 years old. I worked my ass off to get where I am, and just recently, I bought a house. It's a nice place, so much better than the shared apartment I used to live in. It was a huge milestone, something I honestly thought I'd never be able to achieve. The thing is, I moved in only a month ago, and while I'm not exactly fond of my family, I still had enough basic decency to invite them to my housewarming party. My father's reaction? Depressing, to say the least. He looked jealous, almost pissed off. He kept asking me about the furniture, the architect, the interior designer. I only gave him as much information as I wanted to, and that's when the passive-aggressive jab started. "Oh, I had no idea. You never bother telling me anything about your life." It was embarrassing. He was putting our already weak relationship on display in front of my friends, coworkers, even my boss. Then, last week, out of nowhere, he called me at work. I was in the middle of a huge project, but he insisted it was urgent. So, I agreed to meet him. When I got home, I walked into a full-blown intervention. Lisa was there, furious. Emma sat next to her on the couch, eyes red and puffy, glaring at me like I was the villain in some melodrama. My father was in the kitchen, pulling beers out of the fridge. He offered me one. I refused, already on edge. "What's this about?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Have you finally decided to care about your family?" I frowned, already confused. I had no idea what he was talking about. He motioned for me to sit with Lisa and Emma. I reluctantly took a seat on the couch opposite them. Lisa rolled her eyes. Emma crossed her arms. My father sat down next to them, took a sip of his beer, and leaned back. Then he hit me with it. "Are you blind?" Silence. I just stared at him, waiting for an explanation. "If you're not blind, then you're choosing not to see what's right in front of you." I exhaled sharply. "What are you talking about?" He scoffed. "You've gotten so full of yourself since buying this house that you can't even see when your own family needs help." I asked what serious situation he was referring to. That's when he glanced at Emma. She rolled her eyes again before dramatically announcing, "I'm pregnant." I opened my mouth to congratulate her, because, that's what normal people do. But before I could get the words out, She burst into tears. Lisa immediately wrapped her in a hug, giving me the dirtiest look possible. You should be paying attention to what's happening at home, she snapped. You should care about your family. Then my father dropped the real bombshell. Emma just found out, he said. And the father of the baby? He left her over it. Lisa added that Emma had decided to keep the baby, and that this decision should now shape all of our choices moving forward. The only thing I could say was, can she even afford that? The looks I got from both Emma and Lisa could have killed me on the spot. But I wasn't trying to be cruel. I genuinely wanted to help. I figured they might be asking for financial support, and honestly, I was ready to offer that. But then my father got up, walked over, and sat beside me. This is exactly why I called you here, he said. I'm a good father to my daughter, and maybe your mother taught you how to be a good brother. I already didn't like where this was going. He continued, brothers sacrifice everything for their sister's comfort. Excuse me? Look, I understand that she'll need financial help, but sacrificing my entire life? Not happening. I sighed and asked him, what exactly do you want from me? That's when he smiled, patted my back, and said, that's my good boy. I forced a fake smile, but it instantly disappeared the moment he spoke his next words. You're going to give Emma your house. No, I'm not. My answer came out immediately. My father's smile vanished. He frowned and asked why I was being so difficult. I told him I'd be willing to help financially, but the house was mine. At most, I could offer Emma a room for free until she got back on her feet. He stood up, his voice rising. Well, that sounds reasonable. But he wasn't finished. He insisted that I not only give up my house, but that I also move out completely and buy myself another place. I refused, pointing out that Emma wouldn't even be able to pay the bills or maintain the house since she had no job and was about to have a baby. His response? That'll be your responsibility too. Yeah. No. I was furious, but kept my cool. I stood up and said, this is not up for discussion. I'm leaving. And I did. But my father wasn't done. A week later, I came home from work to find strangers carrying my belongings out of my house. I have no idea how my father got in. I don't know where he got a key. But when I walked in, they were moving my stuff out. I rushed inside, demanding to know what the hell was going on. They calmly told me that the homeowner had ordered them to remove these things. I was livid. I snapped. I am the homeowner. Put everything back inside and get the hell out. That was the last thing I expected to come home to. Inside, my father and Emma were still there, standing in my living room, telling me I needed to step up as a brother. I told them to leave. They refused. So I told them I was calling the police. That's when they finally stormed out, hurling insults at me on their way out the door. I know this has already been a long story, but trust me, living through it was a hell of a lot worse. It's been a week since then, and honestly, I do feel a little guilty. That's why I'm writing this. I wasn't wrong for setting boundaries, but at the same time, I can't shake the feeling that maybe they do need my help. And yet, I can't forget how they treated me as a child, how distant and indifferent they were. Now, suddenly, I'm supposed to hand over everything I've worked for? It's too much. Would you agree? I can't even talk about this with my friends. You guys are all I have right now. Update 1. Hey, everyone. Hope you're doing well. It's been a week since my first post, and honestly, I never expected it to get this much attention. I read every comment as they came in. Some made me really think about things. And in the end, I decided not to cut my family off entirely. That decision was mostly because of a phone call from Emma. She wanted to meet up. I agreed, but I wasn't about to let her into my home after what happened last time, so I insisted we meet somewhere neutral. We went to a cafe. At first, she looked tense. Normally, she's arrogant and sharp-tongued, but this time, she seemed different. We sat in a quiet corner, and she got straight to the point. My boyfriend left me, she admitted. I just nodded. Yeah, Dad already told me that. She shook her head. That's just what he thinks. I frowned. Then what really happened? She explained that my father assumed her boyfriend left because he was afraid of commitment. But the truth? Emma has her own issues with commitment. Shocking, right? She told me she actually cared about this guy. But a few days before she told him about the pregnancy, he found out something about her. When they met up, he wanted to talk about it. But before he could say anything, she spoke first. And that pissed him off even more. He lost it. Put a hole in the wall. She told me he scared her. Then, without even hearing her side of the story, he told her they were done. Since then, she's been trying to call him. He won't answer. The only message he sent was short and brutal. I don't want this baby. Tell me when you've handled it. The only way her ex would even consider talking to her again was if she agreed to get rid of the baby. Now, don't get me wrong, Emma is far from innocent. But this guy? He sounded like absolute trash. I asked her, what exactly did he find out? She hesitated before answering. It's weird to talk about this with my brother. I figured she meant the escort work and OnlyFans. So, I just shrugged. It's fine. You don't have to tell me if you're not comfortable. She took a deep breath. And then, she told me everything. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear it. I had my suspicions, but hearing them confirmed was another thing entirely. She started by saying that all she ever wanted was to paint. She wanted to be an artist. But Lisa constantly told her that art wouldn't lead to a stable life or real money. Her mother pushed the idea that finding a man was the only way to secure a good future. Soon enough, older men started paying attention to her. At first, she hated it. It made her skin crawl. When she told Lisa, though, her mother encouraged it. That's a good thing, Lisa told her. Older men know how to handle their money. And let's be honest, they're the only ones who actually have money. Emma was 19 at the time. Lisa told her college wouldn't give her the comfort she wanted in life. She said people would be willing to pay for her youth, and that she might as well take advantage of it. Emma wanted to become a model. She tried reaching out to agencies, but none of them were interested in her. Then, she met a man in his 40s who told her he could get her work. He took her to fancy parties, bought her expensive clothes and jewelry for the events, and made her feel special. She was thrilled until she found out what her first job actually was. She thought it would be a simple dinner with a potential employer. It wasn't. It was a night. And she did it. Afterward, she actually got a small modeling gig, a photo shoot for some unknown brand. But that was it. More men used her while dangling the promise of work in front of her. But every time, they came up with some excuse she wasn't the right fit, or she lacked experience. Then she found out the truth. The man who had been introducing her to these people, he was selling her and making a profit off of every deal. Emma didn't dare go against him. She was afraid he'd kill her. So, instead, she told him she was done with modeling and that she'd settle for any regular, low-paying job. Luckily, he let her go without a fight. After that, she tried working as a waitress in bars. That was the first time she learned what real hard-earned money felt like. But Lisa hated it. Women are the ornaments of this world, Lisa would say. Your only job is to shine and smile like a display piece. You should be taken care of, not serving drinks to drunks. So, Emma started going to dinners with men again, except this time, she charged for her company. She told me there were a lot of lonely men out there who just wanted someone to talk to. But even that led to problems. Stalkers. Obsessive men who felt entitled to more because they had paid. Emma realized that pretending to care, faking emotional intimacy, was actually more dangerous than just sleeping with them. So, she started working as a full-time escort instead. It went well for a while until a friend introduced her to OnlyFans. Emma tried to make it work, but she struggled. She was bad with a camera, didn't know how to edit, and wasn't social enough to build a following. It turned out to be more work than she expected, and she gave up. Then, she met her boyfriend. They had worked together at a cafe before, and she liked him. But he was clingy, possessive, and he never fully trusted her. To be fair, he had good reason not to. Because at the time, she was still working as an escort, and she never told him. Eventually, she quit. He started taking care of her, using what little money he had. Emma was okay with that. Lisa wasn't. Then, Emma got pregnant, and her boyfriend found out everything. She admitted to him that there were several men who could be the father. Now, they all send her money to support her and the baby. One of them even proposed to her. But she knows the only reason these men are helping is because each of them thinks they're the only one. Which is ridiculous, considering they know what she used to do for a living. She doesn't lie to them directly, she just doesn't correct them. And for now, their money is paying her bills. And will probably help with the baby. She told me all of this because she couldn't tell our father. As far as he knows, she just did a little modeling on the side. And she had one bad boyfriend who abandoned her. Lisa, of course, knows most of the truth. And her grand plan? Marry the guy who proposed. Convince him he's the father. But Emma has no idea how to break all of this to our father. Emma didn't want to marry that man. She found him creepy and too old. And she also didn't want to lie to anyone. So I asked her, what exactly do you need from me? Her answer? Just financial support. And I want you to make peace with Dad. She thought I should go along with my father's demands, move out temporarily, and come back once everything settled down. Yeah, that wasn't happening. I politely refused and told her I was willing to help financially, but I wasn't going to leave my house. She called me selfish. She said she had just opened up her entire life to me, and I couldn't even show the basic human decency to help her. Then she went even further. She said my father was right about me, that I deserved to be sent to boarding school instead of growing up in a family. Then she stormed off, stomping her feet like a child. I don't think my response was unfair. But is this really selfishness? Do you think her side of the story justifies her demands? Does honesty alone mean I have to give her everything she asks for? Tell me what you think. Because, honestly, I'm struggling with this. Update 2. This situation won't leave my mind. Another week has passed, and a lot has happened. So here's the update. First, thank you for your support in the last post. After meeting with Emma, my father called me. He wanted to meet at a bar to settle some things. I was curious, so I agreed. We sat at the counter, and my father got straight to the point. I know how much you make. I raised an eyebrow. Why does that matter? Because I know you can afford to buy another house in a few years. I just shrugged. I already have a house. This conversation is over. But he kept pushing. You don't have a family yet. Raising a child alone is hard for a woman. A baby needs a stable home. So I reminded him that Emma had been living with him this whole time, and it had never been an issue before. A baby wouldn't suddenly change that. Then I asked, what exactly is she going to do alone in a big house while pregnant? Shouldn't she be around people who can take care of her? That's when my father really shocked me. Lisa and I will move in with her. I froze. I thought I misheard. What? We'll move in with Emma. Into your house. Before I could even react, the bartender scoffed under his breath. My father heard it. He turned to him, clearly pissed. Something funny? The bartender smirked. Emma. My father narrowed his eyes. You know her? The guy nodded. Yeah, I used to date her. My stomach dropped. My father clenched his fists and shot back. Then why the hell would you start a family you couldn't afford? The bartender raised his hands defensively. I'm not responsible for that family. And I sure as hell don't want to raise a kid that isn't mine. My father demanded an explanation. The guy chuckled bitterly. A year ago, I got a vasectomy. I stared at him. So did my father. He kept going. And somehow, Emma still ended up pregnant. Then he said he had seen her leaving with different men after she lied about where she was going. Later, he found out about her OnlyFans account. At first, he didn't want to believe it. But when Emma finally told him she was pregnant, that was the last straw. He couldn't have kids. So that confirmed everything. She cheated on me this whole time, he said. And I knew it. Then she admitted everything. I could only watch as my father's face changed. Anger, shock, disappointment. The bartender just shrugged. I don't owe Emma a damn thing. If anything, she owes me money, time, honesty. Hell, even just a little bit of love. Then he looked at my father and said, I don't know if you knew about her double life. But I do know this. No father would be proud of a daughter like that. My father pressed his lips together, stood up, and left without another word. Later that night, he texted me, saying he had to pick Lisa up from yoga. I don't know what happened after that, but something did. Because the next day, Emma showed up at my house in tears. She accused me of ruining everything. I let her inside so she wouldn't make a scene outside. She was a mess. I reassured her. I never said a word to Dad. She wiped her eyes. Then how did he find out? That's when she realized. Her ex, the bartender. She stared at me in horror. Dad told me to drop everything and stay at home. He said he's disgusted with me, that he never thought I'd go this far. Then she added something even worse. He told me to straighten out my life and find a decent man, and that my chances of doing that now are pretty much zero. I listened to her, and then I hugged her. For the first time in years, Emma apologized to me. She admitted she thought I was the one who told our father, because he came home right after meeting me and confronted her immediately. I just held her while she cried, because honestly, I had no idea what to say. I forgave Emma, and she went home. As she vented about how awful she felt, she mentioned something interesting. Lisa had been weirdly quiet when my father was talking about good women and their loyalty, like she had something to say but held back. Emma said, there are things I just can't talk about. I asked her what she meant. She wiped her eyes. Lisa can't have an opinion on that. Because, well, yoga. I frowned. Yoga? Emma kept crying, rambling on about everything that had happened. But that word stuck in my mind. Yoga. Why did that feel important? What do you think really happened? Would my father still consider Emma his pride and joy? No one has reached out to me since, but I will figure this out. And when I do, I'll tell you everything. Update 3. It's been only 2 days since my last post. And yet, here we are again. For those asking, Emma's ex's real name doesn't matter. But for the sake of this story, let's call him Bob. Here's what happened. 2 days ago, I met up with my father. I told him I had made a decision. I said I was willing to help raise Emma's child. I'd give her a room in my house and cover expenses like diapers and baby supplies. But she had to find a job as soon as possible. My father shook his head. Then who's going to take care of the baby? I suggested freelancing, maybe working from home. This time, he wasn't as aggressive as usual. He just paused, sighed, and sat down. Then he said something that caught me off guard. You hate me, don't you? I won't lie, he was right. But instead, I asked, why would you think that? Because your mother hated me too. That made me sit up straight. She never said that. She always told me my father loved me, that he cared about me. I told him the only reason I was disappointed in him was because my entire childhood, I believed something that turned out to be a lie. My mother spent years telling me my father was a good man, but all I ever felt from him was neglect and indifference. He rubbed his eyes. I hate myself for a lot of things. Then he admitted something I never expected. He did love my mother, but they barely knew each other before she got pregnant. So, he married her. She was a good wife, but he never felt a spark between them. Then, he met Lisa. And when he said that, my entire world flipped. I couldn't move. I had never known about this. My father went on, saying Lisa ignited a fire in him that he didn't even know existed. He was so happy with her that he didn't even realize he was in love. Not until it was too late. Because then, Lisa got pregnant. He knew it was wrong. He told Lisa to wait. He wanted to tell my mother himself, but Lisa didn't wait. She went straight to my mother. She told her everything. My mother was devastated, and my father admitted all of it. Even then, she stayed respectful. She just asked for a divorce. So, yeah, my parents divorced because my father cheated on my mother, and his mistress got pregnant. I didn't even know it was possible for me to lose more respect for him, but somehow, he managed to sink even lower. He paused and looked at me. Then he dropped another bombshell. I had a wonderful year with Lisa, but then she died. He meant my mother. After she passed, he had to take me back in. But Lisa hated everything about me. She felt insecure. Like maybe my father would put me above their child out of guilt. So, they sent me to boarding school. After 3 years, I had been away long enough that I didn't make Lisa uncomfortable anymore. Love makes you do stupid things, my father said. I wanted to punch him, but I held myself back. Then I saw her, Lisa, standing in the doorway, holding a water bottle. I'm heading to yoga, she said casually, placing the bottle on the table before heading to the kitchen. I blinked. By the time I came to my senses, she had already walked out the door. I don't know why, but something about that moment felt off. I picked up her bottle, intending to return it to her. But by the time I stepped outside, she was already in her car, driving away. I needed to clear my head. So, without thinking, I got into my own car, and I followed her. She parked at the yoga studio and got out. But instead of heading inside, she looked around, checked her surroundings. Then she walked into an alley. I stayed back, watching as she scanned the area again. Then, she got into another car and kissed the driver. I clenched my jaw, barely processing what I was seeing. I parked and got out, walking straight into the yoga studio. I approached the front desk. Does Lisa come here? The receptionist hesitated. We can't give out personal information. I insisted. I'm worried about her. They still refused. But finally, they did confirm one thing. We don't have any client by that name. I walked back to my car, and I waited. I don't know what came over me. But when that car returned, I pulled out my phone, and I started recording. The man got out first, walked around, and opened the door for her. Lisa stepped out. He kissed her. Then he smacked her ass as she strutted toward her car, grinning. I could only stare, because this was about to change everything. Well, that settles the whole yoga mystery. Lisa never even made it to the parking lot before I drove off. So, my father cheated on my mother. And now, he's the one being cheated on. Karma, Dad. He's been calling me nonstop. I haven't answered. Because right now, all I want to do is have a chat with Lisa. Final update. First off, I finally worked up the nerve to confront Lisa. I waited until my father was out of the house. Emma was asleep. I asked Lisa if she had gone to yoga that day. Of course, she said. I go every day, even Sundays. She was in the kitchen, making pasta. I asked her what her instructor's name was. She casually threw out a random name. I asked if it was a man or a woman. She laughed. A woman, obviously. Why would I take lessons from a man? I leaned forward. That's strange. Because the club you go to doesn't have any female instructors. She froze. Her hand stopped stirring the sauce. But she quickly recovered. You're mistaken. Her voice was calm, but her body language wasn't. I told her I had signed up at her exact club the day before, and I had asked about the trainers. They confirmed there were no women. Her hand slipped. The spoon fell. I picked it up, holding it out to her. She didn't take it. Instead, she turned to face me. Where are you going with this? That's when I told her. I saw her. With him. Of course, she denied it. As expected, I didn't argue. I just pulled out my phone, pressed play, and said, maybe my father won't believe me, but he might believe this. Lisa froze. She was silent for an entire minute. Then, something shifted in her expression. She calmed down. She turned back to the stove and kept stirring the pasta. It doesn't matter anymore, she said. I was already planning to divorce him. My eyes widened. This woman was unbelievable. Sure, my father deserved this. But still, she then admitted she had been seeing this man for 3 years. They had rekindled their romance when it was safe. Lisa said they had fallen in love years ago, but at the time, he was married to another woman. A woman whose father had helped him build his career. The stakes were too high, so he chose to stay in his marriage, sort out his finances. Then, eventually, he'd leave his wife and be with Lisa. Meanwhile, Lisa needed someone to take care of her. So, she got with my father. Lisa and her lover broke up and got back together multiple times. Then, she got pregnant with his child and told him to do something about it. But he panicked. So, she handled it herself. She went to my mother, told her everything, and made sure my father had no choice but to marry her. Now, that man is a widower and a business owner, and Lisa wants him back. Women have to do whatever it takes, she said, flashing me a smug smile. But then, her smile vanished. Her whole face drained of color. I turned. My father stood in the doorway, his fists clenched, his eyes bloodshot, his whole body shaking. Well, shit. That night, my father woke Emma up and brought her into the kitchen. Then he asked her, "Who is your father?" Emma looked at Lisa, then shook her head. "I don't care who I'm related to by blood," she said. "I've always known you as my father." My father ran his hands through his hair and paced the room in silence. 2 days later, Lisa and Emma were kicked out. The divorce? Already in progress. They're currently living in a shelter. My father asked me to find him a therapist, and since then, he's apologized to me more times than I can count. Every time, I forgive him. But Lisa? Her lover wants nothing to do with her. He denies they ever had an affair. And now, Lisa is desperate. She's been begging me to help her prove it. She even said I should think of Emma and her baby. But honestly, Lisa, your child is your problem. So what should I do? Should I delete the video? Or let the truth spread? Either way, thank you for being here through all of this. Your support means more than you know.